So practical study advice, right?
I don't know. I think that would be a possibility. Practical study advice. I mean, our students are kind of preparing for the IB. Many of them also for the Austrian Matura. I better move a little bit into the
frame.
into the frame here.
Well, I mean, main question that we had just now is, do we need the IB? That's always the main question. And
Yes.
You say yes.
Yes, that's always a big question.
That's always a big question.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, to get into university, I didn't need my IB diploma. Not saying that you don't need the IB, because what I did get out of the IB was practical experience with stuff like writing essays, just getting used to the workload. And what I mean by that is, if the IB were really about the points, then I'd have to remember everything that I did for biology, but I don't. So obviously it's not about...
So what do you take home then, basically?
What you take home is more procedural skills rather than the content that you memorize or the content that you apply. So technically, although I highly recommend picking subjects you're interested in, it doesn't actually matter what subjects you pick for the IB when you think about it, because what you're ultimately going to take with you from it is not going to be the content, at least not the content that you have to memorize. So it's going to be, how do I structure this essay? It's going to be for subjects like history, like how do I approach writing these essays. For problems like biology, how do I turn a diagram into a piece of text? How do I best apply this knowledge?
So basically skills is the thing that is that you consider most valuable.
Yes.
Okay.
Although you remember some of the content, most of it you're most likely forget.
But that's essentially the case in many disciplines. Ultimately, that what remains are certain skills that you keep. And of course also the ability to then also deal with complex material. So if you in the future are going to read some science article or so, then you're able to understand it much more easily, because it's a certain skill that you actually...
Yes.
Do you have any specific recommendations concerning students who are doing now the IB Diploma, and there is a lot of internal assessments to write, and there's a lot of quantity? What suggestion would you give to the year 7 and year 8, so 11th and 12th graders, as the IB is approaching? And or the Matura, because in our school basically we have many students have a combination of both. Is there any specific study advice that you can give them?
The most basic piece of advice is start early. I think a better piece of advice would be prepared to be frustrated, and don't get frustrated. Try not to get frustrated, because we had people who, you give the advice of start early. We had people who started in the summer, handed it in, and then they still only had 2 weeks to finish the IA, much like everyone else, because the feedback is obviously returned at the same time. So starting early, although it's incredibly helpful, is not, I don't think, the most essential thing. I think it's more about be prepared to...
I know what you mean. I know what you mean, of course, but as a consequence, some people are going to interpret this, okay, well, I simply will not start to study or revise until 2 weeks before the final exam.
No, that's stupid.
But that's how it could be interpreted.
That's how it could be interpreted, except I was only talking about the IAs, and I was only talking about the... basically, if you don't put a lot of effort into your IA, submit it very early, you're going to have 2 weeks to work on a lot of material after you get the feedback back. So obviously, if you start early and if you put a lot of effort into it, you're going to have less work to do.
So basically, a concrete recommendation would be then, make sure that the first version, the draft version, is as complete as possible.
Yes. For example, what I did for biology, I barely handed in anything for the draft, and a lot of people don't know that they only have one draft to hand in. They get feedback once, and then it's the final result. I didn't know that. So my biology draft was essentially nothing. And then I had to write my biology IA based on my chemistry IA, which I put more effort into. So keep in mind that you only get one chance at getting feedback, and the more you hand in, obviously the more feedback you're going to get.
Yes.
So it's very tempting to just not work for the first draft.
Because you always say, I have a final draft anyway to work on, and then you don't put in a lot of work, and then as a consequence you don't get a lot of feedback, and you still have the work to do, and you have less time to do it because basically you had to wait a certain amount of time until you actually get the feedback.
Yes.
And then everything comes together and the workload explodes.
Yep.
Yeah? So in summary, I think it's a pretty good advice.
So I think
first draft, make sure it's as complete.
Make sure it's as complete as you can get it. Maybe even if you think that your first draft is, it rarely ever happens, I've never seen that happen, but if you think your first draft is more than your IA will be, still hand in everything. Because that way you know what to cut out. So,
but I think one of the reasons why people sometimes do not do a very complete draft is because they're kind of worried that if they invest too much time and they're going into the wrong direction, that they invested the time for nothing. But I don't know. I don't really think that this is a big issue, because what you do is you look at the criteria. There are, at least in the sciences, we've got templates. And if you make sure that they are kind of as complete as possible, then I think the chances are very good that you won't have a lot of work later on to do, and basically you get also more quality feedback, because the teacher simply has more material to provide feedback on.
I mean, if you can somehow get your hands on IAs that others have written, past IAs, that would be a big help, so you know sort of what direction you're going into.
Yes.
Because I mean that can happen where you start writing an IA and say you write your written assignment in English and you've completely missed the topic, and you find out too late.
Yeah.
So.
For example, there are certain subjects where there is a lot of material to study. For example, you did biology higher level. I mean, that is a lot of material, maybe not very difficult material, but the quantity is quite high. Do you have any suggestions concerning this? How would you deal with large study amounts and start large study quantities?
I think that's where the advice of start early is. That's where it really matters, because for biology, for example, even though you have a lot of complex processes, you don't need to calculate anything. You don't need to work anything out. You just need to remember the steps of the process, no matter how complicated it gets. So the more you revise it, the better you're going to know it. And the more revision time you have, obviously the more you're going to revise it, or potentially the more you could revise it. So start early for subjects like that. I started studying for the entire IB. Well, I did a little bit of work throughout the year, but I basically started in April. That's when I started to just focus on the IB and just study for all my subjects. And the exams are in May.
But how many hours of study time did you then spend in April? I mean, I think that's first. I personally think that's kind of late. It's only a month, maybe a month and a half in advance.
Definitely, yeah. No, it was too late, because for chemistry I had to start the weekend before the exams. Because you have to study for biology, and then you have the exams coming up for psychology.
One thing but one thing that you have to also tell the audience is, I mean, but you're a pretty good student. I mean, you have a very fast, you understand things very quickly, and because you also.
I think I put a little bit more effort into some stuff than other students did, but no matter how quick you are at understanding things, or how, for example, we had students that could instantly grasp a concept, but that doesn't necessarily mean they do well, because maybe they don't care enough, maybe they don't put the amount of time into it that they would have needed to get a good mark on that subject. Basically, there were a lot of people that could definitely have done better than others had they put the same amount of effort into it. Okay. So yes, of course, it depends on how well you can understand concepts, etc. But realistically, I think it's a question of effort more than how well you are at that, how good you are at that.
Well, many students actually also do the Austrian Reifeprüfung, the Matura. We have a vorgezogene Reifeprüfung, we call this. So this basically means that math and German mother tongue are examined in January of year 8, 12th grade.
Yes. I don't think doing both necessarily limits you in doing well on either. Because we had people that did both and they still did very well on both. We had people that only did one and didn't do as well as the people that did both. So there's not a
correlation.
There's not a clear correlation between.
Let me move the microphone a little bit over so that it's easier for you to, or maybe the sound is going to be better. Yeah. Okay.
There's not a clear correlation between I did both, I did worse, and I did one, I did better.
Okay. Yeah.
But doing both will be more stressful. That's just
Is it more psychological stress or workload? Because it's
both, I'd say, but I think more psychological stress than necessarily more workload, because some of your subjects will overlap, but it's just, I don't know, if you look at just the amount of lessons that people with both have compared to people who only do the IB, there's still a difference. As far as the time that you invest in lessons, as far as the amount of work that you'll have to do for those lessons, because every lesson will require you to do something for it. It's not like you can just show up to the lessons and I mean, technically you could show up to the lessons and not care about it, but that's not how you're that's not the point.
That's not the point, and it's actually a waste of time actually.
Yes, it is.
Do you have any suggestions on how to motivate students? Because also in my biology class, I mean, which is kind of late in the afternoon, especially the higher level class. I mean, I've got some students are almost falling asleep. I mean, it's late in the afternoon. Of course, it's difficult to motivate, and I'm supposed to basically talk about a certain topic, and I know very well that actually the student have all totally different things on their mind. And then at home, I require them to write a nice notebook.
Yes.
They still have to sit down and then copy all the notes over. They're supposed to read the book.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's fair. It is the only way we've managed to schedule the IB and Matura, but yes, students wake up early in the morning, they have lessons the entire day, then from 4 to 6 they have biology higher level. At 6 they leave, some of them live hours away, so until they get home it's 8 o'clock, then you eat something, and before you know it it's 9 o'clock, and you still have assignments and deadlines and exams the next day. I mean, for 7th and 8th graders that's a bit too late, but I always recommend picking the subjects that you like, because when you get to those situations where you have to sit down and study for the subject regardless, it makes it a bit easier when you have a subject that you actually enjoy, that you're actually interested in. Break it up into chunks, I guess, for practical study advice. Not necessarily the amount of work that you do. You don't need to split the chapter up. You can split up how much time you put into it. So even told to people who are trying to cope with mental issues, it's if you're having a tough time getting through your day, split it up, do an hour at a time, do 2 hours at a time, whatever you can manage, and that way it's easier. And it's actually, sometimes you end up in situations where you think to yourself, I only have, say, 2 hours, I'm not going to manage to do anything in those 2 hours. Pick a small amount of work, like a small amount of workload, and do that in those 2 hours. And afterwards, even though you've only done a little bit of work, you'll feel better about yourself. And I think that's really necessary, because you need to feel like you're making progress. As a form of internal self-motivation. Yes.
I have another question. I'm getting very, very different feedbacks from alumni. Some of them actually say, wow, university, for every single university exam I studied more than the whole IB and the Matura together. University is so much more difficult. I'm so glad I did both, because otherwise I wouldn't have the experience and the determination even to manage university. That's basically one side that I'm hearing, and then I'm hearing the other side, like what you told me yesterday. You're saying I don't know, you have an easy time. I don't know, easy time, but I mean, it's not such a big thing. So I'm getting a little bit. I wonder a little bit about the thing.
Sie haben mich gerade gefragt. The question was
about the different views of workload at university, because I'm getting so much different contrasting feedback. And some students say, well, actually, at university it's so much easier than I claim. Well, maybe because you did the IB and the Matura, that you're that well prepared. Then other people are again saying is, wow, I'm studying for every single exam at university. I'm studying more for the whole for everything. And it's so diverse, the feedback, that it's kind of very difficult actually to make sense of the whole thing.
I mean, you could say it's as diverse as the choice of universities.
Ah, okay.
Because the course that I'm doing, where I'm doing it, doesn't have that many hours, at least in my first term. So as far as the sheer amount of hours goes, I went from 40 lessons in school to 14 lessons in 1 week So as far as that goes, it's a lot less work.
But do you have to do a lot of studying also at home then? The lessons
Yes.
are very, lessons are very.
I mean, as far as studying goes, I think I do have more to study.
Okay.
But I definitely also have more time to study. As far as my course go, I obviously have a lot fewer hours per week. More to study, but also more time to study. That doesn't necessarily mean that university will be easier. As far as the students that I've met goes that are in university right now, it seems like the workload that you get for doing the Matura and the IB, both of them at the same time, is more than a student doing just one diploma is confronted with, obviously. Does that mean that they have an easier time coping with university stress and workload? I think so, yes.
I mean, I get both. I mean, where they say, well, actually, every individual exam at university is so much more than the whole IB Matura program together.
Yes, that was true for my brother, for example. He, like, the first 2 years of him in university were a lot tougher than his IB exams. And he also did both. Yeah. But it was a lot tougher for him.
He studied medicine.
He studied medicine, yeah.
Yeah, okay. But you basically, for you feel that subjectively it's different.
For me, yes. For me personally,
so I think that's an important thing to also say. Is it depends a lot on the individual university and the things that you study. Yep. Maybe also on the subjective perception of where your workload.
Yes.
Yeah. Because
it depends on how much you stress yourself for the exams, what you wanted to get on the exams, and what you want to get out of university grade wise, etc. So, I think that really makes a difference.
Okay. What were some of the difficulties that you personally faced when doing the IB and or the Matura program? Were there any things that were more difficult for you? I mean, one has to say maybe that you're actually one of the top students of your class. But
IB wise, no.
What were the difficulties that you experienced?
I think these are difficulties that everybody faced, regardless of how well they did on any of the exams. Time management is insane. Trying to somehow keep your social life together, that's also fun. The biggest issue, and I think that was the same for a lot of students, was staying motivated. Because you start in 6th grade, you're still pretty motivated. 7th grade, it starts to pick up a bit. In 8th grade, you get very tired of it. So the same thing that we talked about earlier, where students come in at 4 in the afternoon and they're still supposed to have 2 hours. As far as time management goes, I can recommend working in the lessons, as difficult as it is, because you're not going to do it at home. If you're bound to be stuck in a classroom for 2 hours, you might as well listen to what the teacher is saying and try to do the exercises.
Pay attention in class and not just simply phase out and
although no one always paid attention in class, that's too much to ask, but try to do it as much as possible because it saves you time. The more you work in class, the less you'll have to work at home. And again, you're stuck in the classroom anyways, you might as well do the work. As far as staying motivated, set yourself some kind of goal. And I know that sounds very cliche, but I don't mean like, no, I want ultimate happiness in life. No, something as simple as like, I want this amount of points. Something that when and I think inevitably everyone does ask themselves when you ask yourself, why am I doing this? What's the point? Why do I bother? Something that you can sort of identify with, look forward to. You can even do that week for week. I'll study through this because I'm looking forward to the weekend, etc. And it sounds really simple, but it's actually really difficult to do. Once the exam stress starts to really hit you, it gets difficult to... it gets very easy to just think, why do I bother? So I think that's the toughest bit of the IB, because the later it gets, the more work you have because you're getting closer to the exams, and the more stressed you become at the same time. So realistically, you're fighting an uphill battle. And I guess something to sort of motivate yourself really helps in that case.
What did you use? How did you keep yourself motivated? Was it the grades?
It was mostly the grades, because I really wanted to get into a certain university. So it was the grades, and then I just kept thinking back to that, as in, yes, I could choose to not do as well, and it would save me a lot of time and effort. But on the other hand, I really wanted to study somewhere, so I needed a certain grade for that, and that was what motivated me. Because it's kind of unfair, but at least for the next couple of years after school, the results you get in school do sort of push you into a certain direction.
Okay.
Like how do you get through doing both with a relatively low amount of stress?
Yes.
Because I think it's unrealistic.
Should you even?
The question is more of like the stress that students communicate. Yeah? Is this something that was because of their own procrastination, of their own not, keeping up with the homeworks, etc., or is this something that is it for example, is it because of all the deadlines that are coming up constantly, or how? I don't know exactly, because I have students that are telling me actually it's okay if you just if you're disciplined and so on, and others go like, this is like cannot handle that, and I don't know exactly
what's the reason behind
it, and if there's a school structure also like part of it, but this is something that we have to discuss, is like how can we change or optimize the.
So is it basically, if the stress, is this the fault of the student or of the school?
That's my
in a very simple.
Very simple way.
I mean, it's probably a combination of.
I think it's more complex.
It's more complex than this, obviously.
It's definitely a combination of both. I mean, yes, students that tend to procrastinate, will obviously have a tougher time because there's a bigger workload coming at them. Students, there are some students which just say, no, it's fine actually. I'm just sticking to the deadlines. I'm moving through. It seems to be okay. There are some students which say, I really can't manage this. It's the same question as students that don't study as much, walk into an exam, walk out, they're completely fine. They say, no, it was fine. Students that study a lot, walk into the exam and walk out saying, I just can't do it. I just can't manage. I think it's a question of mindset, and by that I don't mean like you have to just, it's that simple, just think differently. No, I think the school system definitely plays a part in it, because if you look at exams, for example, a student that fails will be more likely to fail the next time. Because, I don't know if that's backed up by statistics, but it takes a huge toll on a student when they're told that they have failed a subject, that they've done so poorly on this exam.
But that doesn't distinguish us to a different school where they have the same failure in a subject.
That's true.
Maybe, and
what I'm trying to say is it builds up. If you're starting to miss deadlines, you start to miss more deadlines.
How do we have more of that than in other schools? Because if in a different school, like when I was in school, I failed my subject and had but I didn't have both. I only had one curriculum and one final exam. So my question is, doing both, is this the cause of extra stress or not?
Matura and IB. Or is this a personal individual mindset type of thing, approach type of thing?
In any school system.
So we agree probably it's a combination of both, but is it basically like this, we cannot change the system around so easily. So is the bottleneck, if we just say, okay, but what we can work on is kind of on the student, because if we work, then we can achieve more.
But I don't think you can really effectively answer that question, because what you're asking is, first of all, can we measure stress objectively? Because can we say, because of this, there's now more stress coming from it? I mean, what I think is there's more workload coming from it, there's more time pressure coming from it, there's more building up sort of, I don't really want to call it negativity, but there's more sort of this build up of negativity of, I have so much work to do, I'm not managing it, it's only going to get more.
We have this in different schools too.
That's in different schools.
And it's an interesting thing.
But that's the thing, like, I think because there is more of that workload and there are more of these deadlines and there is more of that mindset, that would technically cause more stress. But that's not the case for all students. Like we can't, there's no such thing as a correlation between workload and stress, not necessarily. I would say usually there is. For me there was, but I think, I mean, obviously some people handle it better than others. So why is it that people with the same amount of work, some of them are more stressed and some of them are less stressed? I think generally yes, the fact that we have both causes more stress. Our students retrospectively say that it was more stressful. During the program, they say that it was more stressful doing both. Nevertheless, some of them...
And they spoke to, and where do they have their comparison? Where did they get
because what we hear is from other schools who are only doing the IB Diploma or who are only doing the Matura. I hear the same things.
Exactly.
And they complain about the Zentralmatura, how horrible the VWA and the Zentralmatura is.
I heard the
so
it's same things from academy students that only do this subjects, and they are the stress level is the same, and they only doing the 6 subjects. You see,
but even though objectively they have less hours, they feel subjectively the same stress.
Exactly. So I don't know what to go for. Like what
I think that's the problem, because we can't really measure stress in that sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree, because yes, there were students and the people that were doing both would complain about that. As in, you have fewer hours, why are you complaining? You have so much time, you have so many free periods, you have so much free time, why are you complaining?
It's an interesting question, because
I don't know, the grass is always greener on the other side.
Yeah, I know. I get.
But this is a genuine question that comes all the time. Yeah. Do students that do both curricula have more stress? And I cannot answer that because it's so subjective.
We've had students who actually walked out of the IB Diploma Matura thing. They got all 4s. That's how they calculated. And at the end, said, I don't know what everybody's complaining about. I had the best time of my life, I didn't do any work.
Depends on the student.
It's
an individual question.
It's a very individual question, and sometimes I feel a little bit like the IB, at least in the LISA, it's kind of plays the role of a scapegoat. Okay, so you kind of blame the IB for everything, but if you look around in other schools, they blame the Zentralmatura for everything. Even though we're also doing the Zentralmatura, but it never is really mentioned. It's kind of a side thing. It's kind of interesting, really. Yeah.
That's true, actually. I mean, I can't say whether I would have been just as stressed if I'd only done one.
Yeah.
I doubt it.
Yeah.
Because objectively, I would have had more time.
Yeah.
Whether or not that would have meant that I would have been less stressed. I think, it's a really interesting question, and it's one that you can't really...
Because I think what we can agree on is that probably the subjective approach and the subjective view apparently plays a bigger role than any organizational issues or whether there are 2 diplomas or not.
I guess so, because some students complain and have more work to do, and some students complain just as much and they have less work to do. And there's so many factors that are involved in that, though, because if you're doing both, you actually, in a very strange way, you might be less stressed. Because we had people that showed up to the IB exams not caring because they knew that on their Matura they had a certain safety net, basically.
Okay.
Whereas the people that did the IB, that really mattered to them, because that's the only chance they had. Yeah. That's all they had. So then again, it depends on where you want to study, and you need those points. Or some people, like for the people that are only doing the IB and they're afraid of failing it, I would argue they're far more stressed than the students that are doing both, even if they're trying to aim for high points, because it just depends on how you're doing in relation. If you're in fear of failing, I think obviously you're going to be more stressed, especially if you're only doing the IB, and that's your chance.
That's the only chance you have.
That's the only chance you've got.
Because those who are doing the Matura, they're saying, well, I mean, somehow I'm going to pass the Matura anyway. Any concluding remarks?
Study
hard, do your work, Stick to the deadline. So
Yeah, but
that's
not really advice. That's like saying if you're struggling with anything ever, just do better. That doesn't help. Like yes, of course you should do all of those things. You should work hard. You should stick to the deadlines, etc. But that's like saying do better. How is that any sort of help?
Because we're already trying. We're already giving our best.
That's true.
Or not.
Well, no, it's true. Like the deadlines is the reason the deadlines are set up like that is because there's no other way to like it's supposed to force you to do certain work at a certain time so that it all doesn't
get too much
too much towards the end, because a lot of our deadlines are school internal because of that exact reason, that you won't have time to do it before the actual deadline, so the school forces you to do it earlier. Concluding comments in any way, any sort of advice. I don't know. I feel like one of the issues I've always had with school education in general, and I don't have any idea of how to fix it, is how much assessment influences students. How much how detrimental it can be for a student and it doesn't have anything to do with necessarily with like the teacher or how they break the news to them, but just failing a subject, doing bad on an exam. Because it's sort of I've met a lot of students that just they thought they're not intelligent people or they're not competent people because of their grades in school. And later a lot of them figured out that actually no, they can do fine, or they're a lot better than they thought. So I would say yes, work hard, worry about it, stress. You can't really live without stress throughout this exam phase. It's just they don't necessarily, like, students won't necessarily say that, but it's always when students say I'm bad at this subject.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, some people are better at math than others. That we can see that. Like, some people have an easier time with math, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be inherently bad at that subject.
So in other words, I would interpret it as the following: don't say that you're inherently bad in a subject, but try to do your thing and to do your stuff and to stick to the deadlines. Okay, because this will actually help you to achieve your goals, and then the results are also going to be better. But I think it's also dangerous to simply say, okay, I cannot draw, I cannot do math, I cannot do this. Okay, so basically, because this kind of gives you an excuse not even to try.
Not even to try, and that's very dangerous.
And that's yeah.
So I guess that's.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you.
Enjoy your studies at university.
Will do.